Happy Thursday, Seattle hockey fans. We're going to talk about captains in the NHL. And although the Seattle Kraken don't have one, we do have a connection to one of the latest captains named in the National Hockey League. That, and I'm going to get you some updates on training camp. That's coming up on Locked On Kraken.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are the Seattle Kraken.
What's cracking, Seattle hockey fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken. Today's episode is brought to you by Jace Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jace case. We'll talk about that later on the show. Providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50-plus infections. Get yours today at jacemedical.com. That's Jase medical.com. And as I said, more on the Jace case coming up, but let's talk about this Seattle Kraken team. Now, you've probably been keeping up with NHL news, and there are captains galore, including the son of someone related to one of our very own. That's right. Adam Lowry was tapped as the captain for the Winnipeg Jets. Now, you might recognize that name because his father, well, is one of our coaches. That's right. Adam is the son of Dave Lowry, who is on the coaching staff of our very own Dave Haxtell. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Dave Haxtell tomorrow. But, Adam is going to be the captain for the Winnipeg Jets. There have been a few write-ups actually about Adam and, of course, then Dave being in those articles as well. And that is because Dave Lowry himself was also a captain. And in one of the articles that I read for NHL.com, and if you are a part of the Subtext community, then you received that article straight from me. But Adam talks about being about 7 or so when his father was named captain of the Calgary Flames. So that was a really interesting article to read. And Adam just saying that now that he's older, they're both adults, they can have conversations, and that he hopes that he can lean on his father, even though his father, of course, is coaching with the Seattle Kraken. I thought it was also interesting that the Florida Panthers, of course, wrote about Dave Lowry. And this is where I want to take our conversation about our captain. Now, you know, I have my roundup of favorites. I've always had Eberle in the mix, Yanni Gourde as well. But if you listen to our episode with my criteria, 2 main criteria for captain, then you know that also Jaden Schwartz rising in the ranks, perhaps. I know a lot of people want Yanni Gourde, and I honestly won't be mad if it's Yanni, but everyone has their personal preference and opinion and analysis, and mine is that it should go to Schwartzy or Schultzy. But something cool about just being able to see so many other teams talk about their captains is that, again, we can have those debates and conversations here on Locked On Kraken. But I think ultimately, but I want to pose it to you again, my listeners and viewers on YouTube. I'll tell you a little bit more about my backdrop a little bit later. But I mean, here we go. Do we need a captain this year? And the conversation about Adam and Dave Lowry, as I got to know a little bit more about Dave's history, I didn't know him as a hockey player. I know him as a coach. But Dave Lowry and the Florida Panthers Stanley Cup final run comes into play because, and if you look at the show notes, you'll see that Dave Lowry kind of went off in the playoffs. And so there are a lot of different ways to lead a team. And when I think of a captain, especially for the Seattle Kraken team, I'm adding a third criteria. I want someone that can absolutely command a game. And that's what we're going to need. Is it going to be a quote unquote failure if the Seattle Kraken don't make it at least to the second round? I can't answer that question right now. But I do know that there were some things that left me wanting more. We've talked about our fitness, we've talked about our fatigue, the lack of practice, but you need players like what Dave Lowry was able to do for the Florida Panthers. You need players that can really step up in the postseason. And I thought we got glimpses of that. Yanni Gourde with his tenacious play. I do think Justin Schultz was a player that stepped up. Philip Grubauer stepped up in a big way. But our captain needs to be the person that's going to be out there, that's going to get it done. And again, I think we have a lot of solid, above average type candidates. And I think also you have to look at, what do we talk about everydayers and OGers? You know this. But in season 1, I talked about how I would notice that it was Jordan Eberle and Justin Schultz that would come and speak to media, particularly when it was easy to, I should say, it wouldn't be hard to deduce that morale was a little low, and that effectively the players were going to have to answer the same questions. What's not working? What do you need to improve? What's going on with this? What's going on with that? And I think, to me, that's also a type of leadership. Now, that's not quite the leadership that we want to see in season 3, but it is something. So who's going to be that person for us? Who's going to be the Dave Lowry that steps up in the playoffs? Who do you think? That's the question of the day. Who can make a really strong run almost out of nowhere for this Seattle Kraken team? My answer, I don't think we know yet, but that's why I'm so excited to be heading to Seattle next week for training camp. Unfortunately, I'm going to miss rookie camp, unfortunately for the Locked On Kraken show, but I'll be covering the WNBA playoffs, so I think I'll be all right. But I will be there, and all the more reason why I want you to make sure that you know about our Subtext community. And I'm going to show you my wild and crazy little promo here, but Subtext is going to be free for your first 14 days, but then after that, your subscription, less than $5 a month, is going to help me, as your host of Locked On Kraken, be able to make sure I'm at training camps, get out to Coachella Valley, give you reports from the ECHL, all of those things. So I hope you check it out. But coming up next on Locked On Kraken, I want to talk about another article that I came across, and it actually was sparked from a conversation I was having with someone who's subscribed on Subtext. And they made mention that some people are not so high on Kyler Yamamoto. And I came across an article that I think might explain maybe why there might be some upside with Yamamoto that we weren't going to get with Daniel Sprong. That's coming up on this episode of Locked On Kraken. As I mentioned at the top of the show, this episode of Locked On Kraken is brought to you by Jace Medical. Now, everyone should be empowered to care for themselves. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones against the unexpected. That's why Jace Medical offers the Jace Case. The Jace Case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use and gives you peace of mind so that you are not just hoping that you have access to medication in an emergency, but you actually have it. I mean, I shudder to think, I have a family member, my mother's husband, she got remarried, and, they've run out of medication just, because sometimes you can't get everything that you need with all of the other things that life throws at you. But thinking about the hurricanes that have happened in their area, thinking about COVID and things of that nature, my mom and her husband would be in a really tough spot if ever they couldn't get what they needed. So the Jace Case is one way, but if you head to Jace Medical, they actually have other ways that if you need different types of medication, you can also get those too through their services. They handle everything from the online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care. So don't get caught unprepared. Save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jace Medical, plus an additional $20 off when you use code LOCKEDON at checkout. So head to jacemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com and use promo code LOCKEDON. Thanks again, Seattle Kraken fans, for joining us here on Locked On Kraken as part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Now, you probably noticed that I went back to my super fancy camera and a little bit of a different mic setup, so I hope the audio is okay. But if this episode goes up late, I guess then you know why. But I am actually at a co-working space. There's actually a few co-working spaces here in Brooklyn, New York, but I'm at the one from the Freelancers Union, not affiliated any way, shape, or form, but it was a nice day and I just thought we'd get some fresh air, give you some greenery behind me, and do our podcast here today. So I mentioned Kyler Yamamoto. And there's all it's my good friend Trey Matthews over on Locked On Devils. He kind of calls this silly season. There's a few silly seasons in the NHL season, but one of them is right before the season starts, preseason polls, all of that stuff. And one of the things that you see is, who are the winners and the losers, and honestly, who are some of the diamonds in the rough. And so the score.com, and shout out to our friend Glenn over at the Hockey News, because I actually came across this article in one of his write-ups. 10 best under the radar NHL offseason additions. And what does this have to do with the Seattle Kraken? Well, it's because Daniel Sprong is mentioned. And I feel like in passing, I've alluded to Daniel Sprong getting a pretty good deal. And I'm just going to pull this up here. But he got a $2 million deal. And in the article, I'm going to read this because this is where the Seattle Kraken come in. And then I'm going to make the case for Kyler Yamamoto. It's a mystery why the Seattle Kraken didn't issue Sprong a $737.5K qualifying offer to retain his rights, considering he's only 26 years old and coming off his best season. But the Red Wings stand to gain. And I've talked about this before. I've done the analysis. I've crunched at least the raw numbers. Sprong for sure. We're missing out on 21 goals, 25 assists, despite averaging less than 12 minutes per contest. That's when he suits up. And so I have been maybe not explicitly asking this, but in reading Glenn's article again, and he sent me over here, but I think the answer for why let Sprong out the door and why go for Kyler Yamamoto, it comes because the Seattle Kraken are a checking team. And Kyler Yamamoto, his numbers, we've talked about them before, but his numbers were a little bit low because he was coming off of an injury. And so the question for him, for a lot of people, has been, is he going to be healthy? Well, that's always a question, especially when you're coming off of an injury. But what I like what Glenn writes here is that Sprong has never been known for a tenacious checking game, whereas Kyler Yamamoto has. And I've read up on him in more Edmonton specific and Edmonton local newspapers. And yeah, they like his upside. They like his attitude, his work ethic, and everyone wants to see him be a little healthy. So, can he reach 20 goals, 40 points that he hit in 2021-22? And according to, another roundup, if he can do that, then you're not going to miss Daniel Sprong. And so I'm pulling a few different things from the score, from the Hockey News, but I think that's where we're landing. I am all about the eye test. So I really want to see what Kyler Yamamoto looks like up close and personal. And I'm so excited that I will be in Seattle. Wish me safe travels. But I will be there after covering WNBA playoffs game 2. We'll see what happens between the Washington Mystics and the New York Liberty. But I really want to see where Kyler fits in, because Dave Haxtell, as we know, expected a lot from players on the two-way side, from his forwards in particular. And the checking game, we talked about this around preseason last year. It was very clear that that was the directive from Dave Haxtell and company, that they wanted the team to be aggressive. And if you don't have the puck, go find the puck and win the puck. So then you have the puck. So really wanting to play the percentages of possession in their favor. And then we talked about it. It looked great in preseason. It looked not really great at all in the first month and a half in the season, and then intermittently from there. So kind of pulling all of these different articles together. And again, if you are signed up for Subtext, I'll send you more analysis on this. But if Yamamoto is going to buy into the system, if Yamamoto is going to buy into the sacrifice and come in with the stamina to be able to play the kind of game that Dave Haxtell wants him to play, then yeah, that might answer the question why you don't offer Daniel a qualifying offer and why you do take Kyler Yamamoto. All right, so I don't know. We're just going to have to figure it out. But coming up next, I'm going to break down a little bit more what you can expect from this show in training camp, and again, how you can sign up on Subtext, but then also just check out YouTube, not only to get the latest hashtag content, but also maybe to help me decide a few things, maybe even ask some questions of players yourself. That's coming up on this episode of Locked on Kraken. All right, Seattle Kraken fans, we are just about to land the plane, but not before we talk about training camp. And yeah, I'm going to sneak in some women's hockey as well, because I'll have some updates there for you as well. Training camp. So as I said, we start with rookie camp. The amazing Allison Lucan has an article up, Going Camping, which also I love that article, because if you know anything about Allison Lucan, she's a bit of an outdoors woman herself. So, going camping, 60 players, according to Allison's article. We don't have the full roster. I think I mentioned this on the last episode, trying to hunt that down and make it so it's official, but keep your eyes peeled for that. But, I keep telling you, this has to be, and it's going to be, the most competitive training camp the Seattle Kraken have ever hosted. And I told you, if you haven't already listened to Signals from the Deep, part 2 in particular, there's some really interesting nuggets about opening the season against Vegas. There's some interesting little nuggets there, but also talking about the battle in net. So I'm very curious to see how that's going to play out. There's also a nice article on Edward Shala. Was he perhaps under the radar in the draft? What are we going to get from him? So much attention was placed on Shane Wright, who we talked about earlier this week, because if he does not make the Seattle Kraken squad, yes, he will be able to play for the Firebirds, which I'm leaning towards without obviously seeing him in camp. So I hold that caveat. Without seeing him in camp, I think he's in the AHL this year. And I think that's good for us. Again, super competitive training camp. But I do think it might be best for his development for Shane Wright to be in the AHL this year. But I mean, hey, maybe he really put in the work in the offseason. And you know what? I would love to be wrong. But so for Locked on Kraken, as I mentioned, I'm going to be traveling to Seattle on the 20th, and I will be there through the 7th. I think I mentioned the other day that I'm going to stay through, or at least the plan is right now, that I'll be there for Megan Rapinoe's final match for the final home match for the OL Reign, formerly the Seattle Reign. It's going to be a big one, Seattle. I hope you put on for Megan just like you put on for Sue. I know you will. But I'm going to have a lot of time. And there are a few interviews that I've already got set up that I'll tell you more about once I get to Seattle. I talked about Goodreads, which is going to be something that we bring over to Subtext. I've talked about the crossover. I love a strong crossover between women's sports, but also just some of the ways that the NHL is looking to engage fans. So all of that are things that we have in the works. They're not final yet, so I don't want to say too much. But what I also want is for us as a community to be communicative. So whether it's lockedonkraken@gmail.com, whether it's the comments on YouTube, or if you want to join the Subtext community. I really hope to hear from you. I know that you want more player interviews, and that's kind of why I'm testing this setup here. So I've got it's called a monopod. Maybe I'll show you some behind the scenes stuff on YouTube. And then I've got this telescope. I can get in there in the scrum. So I have some things that I'm hoping to make sure that the audio, I know we had some great interviews last year, but you couldn't hear my questions. And so this setup that I have a dual mic, but also I can do this if I have to. If you're not watching on YouTube, I have a small little wireless microphone that's on like a desktop tripod, and I'm essentially using it as a boom stick. So yeah, but so I've invested some things, and I'll be able to continue to do that, especially if we get that Subtext community going. So remember, you can join Subtext. Let me put the graphic up again for you. But you can join Subtext by checking out the link in the show notes. But you can also text 918-731-3154, and that'll get you started. 918-731-3154. And it's basically a subscription. It's like a text. It's like a newsletter, but in text message form. But it's even more than that, because as some of our subscribers already know, you can also send me messages and I'll answer them, and they'll be just you and I talking. And that's how, again, I came across something to respond to someone's question. And then I was like, actually, I kind of want to talk about this on the show. Let's do that. So you're helping curate content here, which of course is always appreciated, but I want this to be a conversation. You know, it's only me. I'm your only host here. So anytime I get to engage with you is a good time. Other plans. There are a few days where the Kraken will not be hitting the ice, and I have to check out the OL rain schedule. Again, I have a few other things lined up, but I'm hoping that we can do a little meetup. And of course, we have to go to Rough and Tumble for that. So you're going to want to stay tuned for that. If you join Subtext, what I'll do is, once I have all of the details finalized, I'll have you on a special list just for that. If you want to come to the meetup, and that way you'll get the information. But if you don't, you won't. You won't get that information, so I won't have to bug you with that. But all that to say, there's going to be so many great ways to stay Locked On Kraken. And I'm really excited about all of them. As always, thank you so much to the everydayers, to the OGers. And if you're stopping by for the first time, I hope you enjoyed it. And we're going to continue keeping our eye on the captaincy. Only 8 teams, the Seattle Kraken included. I think it's still 8 is the tally. Don't have a captain. Do we need a captain this year? I'm leaning towards yes, because we need more than we had last year to go further than we did last year. And does that captain exist on the roster? I think it does. I think he's there. And I think pulling from the alternates, pulling from someone who has Stanley Cup experience, and pulling from someone who also can, when the team's quite honestly got to answer to some of the things that they're just not quite, they're not performing up to expectation. And you know what? I know I say that Yanni's not my choice, but he fits all those buckets. So again, I know people come in the comments and they're like, what about Yanni? I get it. I just don't want people to overlook Schwartz, Schultz, Eberle. I think even Jared McCann. He could be a sleeper pick, honestly. But you know who the real sleeper pick is? And I know some people have thoughts about, I think that's why Eberle kind of gets a demerit. Justin and Jaden, because of their age. But Adam Larson, he's more of the silent type. But yeah, Adam Larson could be a good pick as well. But we're going to have to see. But I think there is lots of leadership, regardless of if anyone wears the captain or not, or the captain's seat or not. And I guess it's just a matter of if the outside narrative bothers us. But there are so many narratives last year, and we performed better than anyone thought. So I'm not worried about that with this crew. I think we're going to be okay, but I do see value in having a captain this year. So, but I think it's going to depend on of course, training camp. Can you tell I'm excited about training camp? And I wanted to just say this as we close. But yes, training camp, you can attend training camp and it's free of charge. And there's even some like fun giveaways that they do and stuff like that. So make sure you check out the show notes because I've got the link there. And of course, you can also check out the full schedule on the Kraken webpage, as well as Kraken Community Iceplex, their website as well. But you know what I'm going to say? It's Thursday. We've got one more episode tomorrow. But I want to remind you to be kind to yourselves, be kind to each other, and hold fast, stay true, and say it loud and proud with your whole chest. Let's go, Kraken. I'll catch you on the next episode. Peace.